Good morning, Jean-Louis. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us today to discuss some issues relating to human rights. As you know, there were a lot of strategies and action plans that came out towards the end of last year. And that's what I'd like to focus on in today's conversation. So 2016 is going to be an important year because it's going to be the first year that sees the implementation of these strategies and action plans. If I may, I'd like to start with a question about the Gender Action Plan, because as you know, girls' rights are particularly important to Plan International. We were very, very happy to see the renewal of the Gender Action Plan, and we welcome very much its contents, particularly the section on raising institutional awareness of gender and creating greater leadership in the various EU institutions and structures on gender. In the section that's dedicated to raising institutional awareness and leadership, there are an awful lot of activities and actions, as you know, that are foreseen. I would say it's even very ambitious. How do you think that you're really going to manage to actually implement all these?
Well, first of all, good morning, Tanya. Thank you very much for having me with you. And yes, it's a real pleasure to discuss these various action plans and new frameworks that we have set up in the end of last year and now are going to be implemented. As you said, on the Gender Action Plan, it's very ambitious, but I think we have a very strong and important support from the political setup stating from the start. I mean, you certainly remember Vice President Timmermans announcing in New York last September that he was a feminist. So did Commissioner Mimica when he quoted that he has the most, I'm not exactly sure about the wording, but more or less it was like, I'm the most vocal male feminist or activist of this commission. So it's clear there is strong commitment at the political level. Now, this is also part of the answer to your question. I don't want to escape it, far from that. We have a lot of actions. This is something we would like to have taken seriously on board at all levels, so political, but also the administrative. So you mentioned services, both EAS and the Commission are on board. All our delegations are on board, and of course our member states, because the action plan is not only setting the agenda for the EU institution, it's also a common endeavour we have with all other member states. Now, how do we get down to implementation? Because this is what matters at the end of the day. We'll have, and you said it, we have a strong list, or it's not only a list, but actions that we want to implement in the delegation through, well, more awareness, more capacity, more resources, and more commitment. And basically what we're talking about is a cultural shift. It's really changing the mind that imports. We've had experience with the previous action plan. We know that up to a certain point it worked, but not enough, as we know from our evaluation. We now need to go further on. It's not only a nice add-on that we want to have, it's really a must-do. So how do we intend to do? Well, first of all, gender analysis will be promoted and done by all our delegation, because the action plan is a far-reaching document in three main areas, and we want the delegation to know what they do actually in the country they're working with. So it's not that they need to be gender blind, they have to have an analysis to what matters, what imports in a country or what doesn't. So first of all, they will have to produce a gender analysis. Second, knowing what they're doing, they will have to implement it in the sense that we will not accept as an institution or a service or as a DG that, oh yes, gender, of course it's important, but it's not that important, so that we should not have it on board. So we've already changed numbers of procedures, templates, and mechanical elements of the procedures of the setup, but we want the delegation. And what we want them to be is accountable for gender issues, like if you don't have any gender dimension in your program, you will have to justify it. There might be cases where there's no gender dimension, but we want this to be thoroughly analyzed by the services, by the delegation, when they produce and when they come up with a program. So clearly accountability. And as you might have heard or you will see, our Director General has personally committed himself to follow up on this and ask all our head of delegations and head of cooperation to explain and to be personally accountable to him on this issue. So I'm sure the message will go through.
And will you make a distinction between actions you do more towards girls and others that may have an impact on women more, so that we know whether we're actually at which age range that we're targeting at any point in time?
This is a very good question, and this is a real issue because as we were speaking now, in some cases we don't even have sex disaggregated statistics on what we do. For all good and bad reasons, because the statistical capacity in the member state does not exist, because we have no reporting on the statistical data. We know it's crucial to have these elements, specifically for women, because the tranches or the age of 15 or the age between 15 and 24 are relevant to specific actions. Now, we certainly continue and push for having this data available, but it's not something I can decide on my own here in Brussels. It's something we need to increment in a process. But clearly, we would need to know that in a perfect world, certainly.
Great. As you probably know, because we have talked about this before, Plan was a little disappointed that you didn't focus more on the discrimination that girls and women face, which, in our opinion at least, underpins probably every challenge that they face in their lives, and certainly underpins many of the actions that you want to achieve in the Gender Action Plan. Could you say a little bit about how you would expect EU delegations, member states and any other actor who's involved in implementing the action plan, how they will take a rights-based approach if they're not going to address discrimination, which is a root cause of the challenges that girls and women are facing? How then would you also imagine that we could tackle things like FGMC, child marriage, getting girls and women into decent work opportunities later in life? How will we tackle this if we don't tackle the underlying discrimination?
Well, excellent question again. We're touching about a range of issues. Behind the gap, and we had that discussion already, but behind the gap is about discrimination. Clearly, we are addressing a population which is, in numbers of countries, discriminated. So the fact that we didn't restate it, or didn't restate the obvious that gender discrimination is a root cause for numbers of issues. It's not necessarily, and that we might disagree on, it's not necessarily something that we've left aside. You've mentioned rights-based approach. This is also another file or another issue or another track we are pushing, because this is also something which was agreed upon last year by the Council and by Member States, that the EU will now move into a rights-based approach. There again, another difficult, or not difficult, challenging, sorry, file and an area where we will have to convince our delegation, our colleagues, I would say, to work in a different way. So mixing the two is certainly a way, because one is not independent from the others. We're talking about rights, we are talking about situation where all these elements can be assessed. I would say basically I will come back to the gender analysis, because at the start, if you look at how the situation is in a specific country, you will discover that, of course, not everyone is the same. Quite obvious, but we sometimes need to repeat it, that people in Brussels don't believe that one size fits all is the result or is the answer to everything. So we need to look at the local context, at the local issues. One thing in the country might work and the country next to it might not. legislation, societies are different. So we need to look and address every single society in a different way. And this is very much what we entail when we're talking about gender analysis. Stemming from that, then you can build on, well, what do we do actually specifically in gender issues, like what you've mentioned, like early marriages or FGM, I mean, just to mention two rapidly. But also, it's more broader than that, because when you look through a right-based approach, you'll have an impact on gender in other areas like transport, energy. I mean, I'm always mentioning these two, and I'm getting famous for that, because I think this is really, if we reach out to these ones, we'll have done quite a job, I would say.
Absolutely. You're certainly going to have your work cut out, because it's very ambitious what you're planning.
That would be a good news.
Yes, absolutely. Especially when we see the results coming through.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I could move on to another very important plan that was also adopted by all the EU institutions and the member states as well last year, and that's the Human Rights Action Plan, which is clearly very comprehensive. I'd like to focus, if I may, on the children's rights section of this plan. There are 2 points that I find particularly interesting. One is on the intentions of the EU to strengthen child protection systems. And the second is the intention to improve the EU's work on economic, social and cultural rights. Could you say a little bit about how your unit will contribute to implementing these points?
Thank you again for mentioning the Human Rights Action Plan, which is, I think, a very important bit of our overall strategy. Now, referring specifically to the point 14 of this plan, which is the one you mentioned, we definitely changed strategy on this, because we come from a more specific area or targeted targeted way to address issues into a more comprehensive system of protection of the children that we want to push forward in the future, as it is much more complementary and has a holistic view of how we can protect and promote children's rights. We believe that children are important in EU development because they are the drivers for change and they are our future, as we all know. Now, children protection system entails actors, systems, institutions. So this makes it also very important to have all the elements on board and not only one on the other. The second thing on that is that it does not stop us for addressing specific issue, and I'll come back to that because it might be that we want to get into one or the other. The second element is economical social rights. As you pointed out, this is an issue that we have been tackling and discussing and moving in the recent years, because when the past period we were less perhaps present, if I might say, or less active on these issues. Now, for children means right to education, right to health, right to water, sanitation, etc. So all economic and social rights are included. And there again, I mean, in the terms of how we implement it, rights-based approach will certainly be an important thing, but also using the toolkit we've produced jointly with the UNICEF is a way that we can help our colleagues to address, to understand, and then to address these issues through our programs or the various projects that are going to develop at the local level. Now, last thing I wanted to say, you mentioned two, but there is a third leg which is also important, which is promoting the ratification of all UN protocol, because of course we're talking about an international setup. It is important that we push for adoptions by all the countries in the world of, let's say, the protocol on child labor, for instance, or children are affected by armed conflicts. Now, this being said, we are trying. I would like to mention also two things. We spoke about gender just a few minutes ago. Now we're speaking about children. There is an intersectionality of two. You mentioned it in your questions. Definitely, there are specific issues we'd like to address, and we are trying to address now with our cooperation and the few funds that I have available in Brussels at the headquarter level. And we are trying to push for addressing issues like birth registration and also looking at FGM, early marriages, which are very important issues for girls, boys, but children in general, especially when we're talking about RAS registration. So we are now starting new contributions to UNICEF and UFPA programs that are at the world level addressing these issues. Another way to do it is to use the human rights instruments, or the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights, the small EADHR as we call it, where we just launched last August a call for proposal with a specific dedicated lot of 5 million for looking for projects in the field of or trying to help or not help, but I mean solved partially the issue of children in armed conflicts. So we are now reviewing the proposals, and then I'm sure we'll come up with a few good projects down the line during 2016.
Great news.
Thank you.
We were very, very excited when last year, in September, at the UN General Assembly, Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development was adopted with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, Plan had been quite active in working on this, and we worked very closely with the EU, and the EU was an extremely positive actor in negotiations. I was wondering whether you, in your unit, you've already started thinking about how to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, because many of them are really about realising people's rights in a number of different areas. And whether you've been called upon by Vice President Timmermans to contribute to the thinking around how the EU as a whole needs to implement the SDGs because of this very important human rights aspect to it.
Well, SDGs is going to be the challenge. As you know, the final outcome of the process is not really, I mean, we are close to it in the sense that the UN Statistical Commission will end up its works in March this year, so providing the statistical environment which is necessary to start implementing. But I mean, we won't wait for it to start looking at that. Of course, what we've done since, let's say, the day more or less the SDGs were adopted, is immediately look into how not only my project, but all the projects in cooperation development as a whole are contributing, or which SDGs they could address. Now, we didn't get into the point to set the objective, because this is not our goal, our own goal and our responsibility. But clearly, finding out what contribution each individual program or project can contribute to is something we've already done, and we've identified almost, at least in my unit and in my remits, I'm very close, and I know exactly where and what I'm contributing to, or what I'm looking at. So mainly I would say goal 16 and goal 5 for what concerns specifically my responsibilities. Now, about the whole thinking on how we are going to follow, review, etc. This is a debate which is ongoing. I want to debate an issue which is now considered within the Commission. Of course, you've mentioned Vice President Timmermans, but also Vice President Katainen, Commissioner Mimica, and Vice President Mogherini, the High Representative. So everyone is at the table, I would say, to look and to think about it. I can probably say little about it. We are contributing, but we're a bit far away from that for the moment in terms of distance. Nevertheless, we know things are going on, and we are at one point in time it will certainly come to us.
In terms of the governance and accountability mechanisms that the EU has at its disposal at the moment, do you think they're adequate for the monitoring, accountability and review that will be necessary for Agenda 2030? Or do you think that actually we're going to need to be thinking, or you're going to need to be thinking about some extra processes and some extra mechanisms in some areas?
As I see it, of course, what is new is, let's start with that. What is new with the SDG is that it's not only concerning the development world. It has a different dimension. I mean, it's encompassing all kinds of issues. And also the position that traditionally the member states or our member states had vis-à-vis MDG was quite simple. We are providing funds, to make it short, including the EU, and we should look and monitor how this has contributed to the improvement or the reaching the goals that were set globally. Now, we're in a different way. We're on a different world in the sense that when a lot of SDGs also concerns our own member states. So we have to look internally to how we do and what we do. Primarily, the responsibility lies with our member states and all the states part to the SDG process and package. So this is something we need to, as I said, discuss internally also to see how we do it, but also I suppose at the end of the day, very much we'll have to talk, and I'm sure our member states are extremely eager to know what will be and how it will be done. Because we are, as you know, the EU is not member of the UN. We are coordinating 28 member states. It works well. You mentioned the fact that it worked well for the negotiation part, and that was recognized, fair enough. Now, how and what's going to be EU role in the monitoring is to be designed. I mean, I have no clue today to answer you. Of course, we are interested in monitoring because a lot of things, as I said, we do are impacting and will impact the results and the development of countries. But is there a role that specifically will be dedicated to us? Are our member states going to hand over some part of it or not is totally open for the moment. I would say I have my personal view, but this absolutely doesn't matter.
Well, I'll share my personal view with you, and I think that probably the EU will be called on to do a certain amount of monitoring, not least because the EU leads in some instances. I mean, the Commission sometimes has sort of the right of decision in some instances and in some areas. And of course, it's always this issue of subsidiarity, which is so complex and so interesting in the case of the EU between the Commission and the Member States. So it's going to be, I think, a bit of a watch this space for the time being. I agree with you on that.
Well, we should keep in mind, well, development policy is a shared competence between the EU and the Member States. So clearly, there is room for cooperation, debate and coordination, certainly.
Yeah. It will come as no surprise to you that I'm going to bring up funding now and financial resources, because when so many plans and strategies are launched and we have such an ambitious set of international goals such as the Sustainable Development Goals, clearly financial resources are going to be needed to be able to implement all these plans adequately, I would say, but certainly if we're going to be ambitious about the implementation of them. So many people are looking to the midterm review as an ideal moment for potentially seeing how one can fund the strategies and the action plans that have been agreed. And indeed, the Gender Action Plan actually mentions this quite specifically, that it will look to the midterm review. Have you already started thinking about this, and in what way do you think some monies can be moved or budget lines can be added, changed? Will it be more than just a tweaking around the edges this time around? Will there be some real changes?
Well, the midterm review is starting. I mean, from a procedural and technical point of view, because we have to prepare. Midterm review is due for end of 2017, knowing that we have to go through various steps, including a procedural one, and the new way the Commission is working needs also a lot of coordination at the start. So this is ongoing. We're at the very, very beginning of it. As you know, well, the midterm review will also entail an evaluation of all the European financial or the external financial instruments, one per one. So each individual regulation as it stands, or legal basis as it stands for the moment, will be reviewed and thoroughly go through an evaluation, external evaluation, meaning we're preparing that. And of course, the outcome will be scheduled during the period, so to be so that the output or the results can be taken on board in the midterm review. Now, the midterm review is expected. It's in a way strange because we nearly started implementation. I mean, it was last year that we started. And we are already talking about a review and possible the future MFF, which are due to start in 2021. So we are starting from very early, I would say, to go through. I mean, in terms of the MTR, the midterm review will be an opportunity. This is clear. I mean, you are not the only one mentioning it. I think the Parliament and other institutions also, including our member states, are keen and would be happy to see a bit how things are running. And of course, because the world has changed, not only because of the SDG, but the general environment, if we look back 2 years ago, was rather different, or the views that, or the perspective we had at that time might be quite different if we think about it today. Just to say security and migration, to mention two issues that have come up to the top, on the very top agenda. This was present, but it was not as accurate as it is today. Now, how this will change, who are the actors who will play? Everyone will be involved. I mean, I've mentioned institution, but of course there will be, through the evaluation, there will be a public consultation for civil society and general public to, during a certain period of time, as we usually do, give its opinion on whether it was or it seems to be convenient or efficient or not, and provide input on what could be changed. Mm-hmm. So there will be a real opportunity for everyone to express himself or herself on these issues. And this is part of the process we regularly put in place, and we'll do that for the MTR. Now, how it will move, of course, there's a strong lobby, and we're coming back to the Gender Action Plan, or strong lobby, strong views, sometimes saying, well, we should put money and more money on it. I would say, let's try to see how the first 2 years of the action plan works. I mean, whether mainstreaming actually goes into reality. I mean, it didn't really happen in the past under the past Gender Action Plan. We're trying to move it, and as I said, put it as it's not a choice. We don't have the choice. So as long as you can divert or take the gender dimension into all our programs, we'll make a tremendous effort. And it's not necessarily about money. It's about changing the idea, changing the funds. Now, I know there are different views saying, well, if you don't address it, if you don't put money under or behind your plan, it will never fly, it will never hand in back, because you will not address the issues, and you might not address specific cases or specific thematic that you need to or you must address, otherwise you will not have. Well, this is part of the debate, including internally. For the moment, the frame is what we have. The money is what we have, and I don't expect it to increase or to change. So there is an envelope. We must do, or we have to use it to our best with all the flexibilities existing or non-existing. But I mean, this is how we see it for the moment.
Okay. Just like to follow up on that a little bit, if I may, because I must admit I probably situate more in the camp that says, with a bit more financial resources, we can definitely do a little bit more, mm-hmm. and be a little bit more ambitious, because mainstreaming will achieve certain results, but not everything that's in the Gender Action Plan by far, if we just look at the Gender Action Plan. And of course, there are other action plans like the human rights one we've talked about and the SDGs. So I definitely would tend to be of the opinion that probably we need to be thinking about pushing for some more money where human rights are concerned, and seeing where that can come from. Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing from you, though, is rather that we're likely to tweak around the edges than to have some kind of considerable increase in funding, or a relevant increase in funding, perhaps. Do you not fear our missing the boat if we're going to wait to see how the first 2 years of the Gender Action Plan goes? Because then the midterm review is over. And if we suddenly think, yes, we could have done with more funds, it's too late.
I agree. Let's say 2 years, I mean, including that one, but I mean, it will go in parallel. This is one of the difficulties we have with the strategies, the various strategies and plans that we've put in place last year. It needs to run. I mean, we need to put them in place, and I think we'll do, be it the Gender Action Plan, be it the Human Rights Action Plan. And in the meantime, we are already starting the evaluation. So to be on time with the various milestones that we have in front of us, and that will be difficult. I understand your point. I see how your reasoning, and I think in certain areas you might be right. Now, as I said, the envelope is what it is. I mean, I don't see any increase in any budgets. Also, topping up an additional 100 millions from outside to what we have is not a possible scenario. The question is whether we divert money from one area or one instrument more into gender or into a different area. Now, of course, if we put additional money on gender, let's say, it will mean that we take it out somewhere else. Now, this is a matter of shifting priorities, deciding whether, I don't want to put awkward choices on the table, but is environment or private sector or, I don't know, health less important than gender or the other way around? I mean, honestly, I don't have the answer because to me, all are important. It's a bit difficult to make that kind of choices. But if we were to move money in an extensive way, it would certainly entail that one or another instrument, be it on a thematic or be it on a geographical basis, will have to receive less or have less means to implement its own strategy. So this is, of course, something we need to put together, look at all the issues, possible options and solutions, and go back to our commissioner and discuss it.
Wonderful. You definitely have some difficult choices, I think, to be thinking about at least.
Yeah, but I mean, it's clear, but it's part of the challenge.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and some of the interesting sides of the job probably as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us and to talk with us. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.